Please note, this podcast may be triggering to some as it discusses themes centered around emotional, physical, mental, and sexual violence. If you are a survivor or know someone suffering the effects of these issues, please take care while listening. Additionally, this podcast and content shared is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for medical or mental health advice. Welcome to When Heaven Meets Hell. I'm your host, Allyn, and this is the retelling of my experience with narcissistic abuse and coercive control from my perspective. In this podcast, I unravel my storybook romance turned nightmare when an unexpected breakup revealed my fiancé's double life, including a massive web of lies, deceit, cheating, and betrayal. Together, with the help of world-renowned guest experts, we'll tackle the harsh realities of complex PTSD, trauma, and grief, illuminating these often overlooked issues and inspiring change for women facing these challenges. So 2024 began, and it's not like it was some magical turning of the page. It was just feeling like a lot was behind me, and where do I go from here? How do you continue to move on? And leaving is never an event. I think we tend to look at it as an event. It really is a process. The end of these relationships is a process. And so I was going through the motions of that. Like I had said previously, I feel like this relationship and the ending of it had been like a continual just hit after hit after hit every week, and that kind of ceased around the end of the year. And so when I'm talking about the start of the year, it really was kind of when I was able to get a full breath of air or kind of my feet under me a little bit, and that's when you're kind of left saying, okay, the dust is settling a little bit, and now what do we do? And, things are done, but you feel all kinds of undone. And it's just a feeling of what do you do with, kind of rising from the ashes of this, and how do you make something of nothing? You feel like nothing, really. And, you look at it as a thing that has happened, but it really is this widespread systemic just burn that happened, and nothing is the same. And when I started working on the show or thinking about the show, it really kind of stemmed from this idea that I didn't know what this would look like in any capacity. I just knew that I needed to get this all out of my mind. And I also felt like I was keeping a big secret. Not that I was trying to keep a secret, but I went dark for a very long time, for months and months and months. It's kind of like I was working on a launch of something with my business, and I was on social media all the time. I was, that's what I was doing for work, and having my online business and this community and everything, and went dark. And to me, it feels extremely inauthentic to just randomly one day, 4 months later, pop back up and, keep going as usual, or try to sell something. I didn't even have anything I wanted to sell, or just kind of start posting randomly. It just didn't feel like me in any way. I was like, how do I make it make sense? And this is obviously more than a post or two, and I needed to talk about it, and I didn't know how. I just knew I needed to get this out in a way for me to move forward. It was a step for me to move forward in life, and I didn't know, who would hear it or what that would even look like, but I needed to do it for me. And hopefully help other people in it, because I think in going through the process too, you see all these holes and these gaps, and you have even more questions. And I wanted to kind of fill in some of those for other women going through anything similar. And so that was kind of the start of the year, is trying to identify what is next. How do I even move forward? I feel like I'm carrying this thing that I didn't ask to carry or want to carry or even know how to. And I started talking to Tara Newell, and she and I have become great friends. She is the survivor of Dirty John Meehan. I will share more about her, but she's phenomenal, and she and I started kind of connecting more. It just helped to have someone who has been through something life-altering, granted, extremely, extremely different, very different ends of the spectrum, and even what we're talking about, but to have someone who has been through something that changes you, that shapes you. And again, you will never be the person that you were the day before or weeks before, months before, whatever it was. And she and I could relate on that. And she is obviously a lot further along than me, years out of this process. And she had her podcast Survivor Squad at the time. She now has Tara's Baddie Club and some other amazing things in the works. But she knew this world inside and out. And she was telling me, she said, Allyn, just get it all out. Get it out of your system and out of your phone and out of everywhere. And that was great advice. That's something also that I would recommend to other survivors, is to just get it all out and out of everywhere. And by this, I mean, she recommended that I make a spreadsheet. And this was, well, I think she said to make a timeline. And I am just like a like organization freak. So I made a spreadsheet timeline. But I went on and I just took anything that I had in terms of screenshots or even physical items or photos or anything, timestamps, anything. And I just went in and put it all in a timeline. And I got it out of my mind, even like in my mind of when things happened, what happened. I got it all out because part of that is I had been kind of gatekeeping that in my mind. And something that you do as someone who's been through trauma. I've heard other people talk about this also. I know Lee Collins, she will be on too. She has the podcast Extraordinary. She went through a brutal attack, and something she did that I resonated with and have done as well is you keep ruminating on the facts and what has happened. And she did that kind of as a means to keep the story at the forefront of her mind. She did that for a means of just being sharp for when she would go to court and testify. But you keep it running in your mind all the time. And so it's exhausting. And it doesn't mean that you won't still do it, but to be able to have it out on paper or written out in some capacity just felt like a weight lifted kind of off my shoulders a little bit. And to see it too made me feel like, oh, this is what I thought. And to connect the dots that way was extremely helpful and validating as well, because you are connecting it all and making it all make sense in your mind, and you check all the boxes and you know what it looks like. But to see it all on paper is quite a sight to see. And so that is just something that I would recommend as well. But Tara helped me with that. And that was kind of the start, honestly, of this show, I suppose, but even just in this next chapter and in healing. And I just want to pull out some numbers from that spreadsheet just to kind of give you guys some perspective of what these relationships look like, what mine in particular, obviously we're talking about my experience here, what this looked like. This was 3 months into 2024 when I ran some of these numbers. I'm a numbers person, so it kind of helps too to make it more tangible, I think, when you're dealing with this, or if you're in a relationship like this. There's a lot of gaslighting, obviously mental, emotional manipulation, coercive control, and stuff like that. And so if you can get actual tangible things in front of you, I think that helps too. And for me, this was really healing to actually be like, oh, Allyn, it wasn't actually, just something bad. This had a very big effect on you, and the numbers are the numbers. You can't push those aside or sweep them under the rug. Those are what they are. So again, this was about 3 months. I guess I'm saying that this was about 3 months out of the breakup when I made this. I, in general, went 2 weeks out of work completely. This was just out of the breakup. Out of work for 2 weeks until I went back part-time. And then another 3 weeks until I went full-time. So that's 5 weeks until I went back to work full-time. I never came back to social media and everything, honestly, until I launched the podcast and started talking about the podcast, which would have been in August of 2024. So that was a long time later, but I wasn't selling on social media. I wasn't doing anything. I took a big financial hit with that. I did not keep a razor for 5 weeks. I did not drive for 6 weeks. I did not manage my medications for 8 weeks. I did not stay alone for 20 weeks. And by that, I mean, I would be alone for maybe little spurts. But I was never back in a place of truly being alone, especially staying the night alone. My deepest bruise was 11 weeks, which is very hard to believe, but that is true and verified by my doctor. One day I was looking in the mirror a long time after, and I was like, what is that? And I was like, oh my gosh, how is it still there? And I remember I looked it up. I sent in a portal message. I was like, what? How is this possible? And sure enough, that is very possible. So my deepest bruise lasted 11 weeks. I had 15 plus doctor's appointments throughout our relationship and after. Again, this was up until the point of making this. There's been more since. I had 2 urgent care visits, 44 therapy appointments, 9 ketamine appointments. I did 1 sweat lodge, which I will talk about. I thought about trying to total up the amount of money, but I couldn't even get into that. So that I can't even begin to count the amount of flights, miles, money spent, the birthday presents, the grocery bills, the massage, the things that I did that he knew were pointless and yet encouraged. So there was an immense financial loss there. And so those are just some of the things to pull out and highlight. And this wasn't even a long relationship. So you can sit here and say it wasn't anything, or it was a fling, or it was whatever, but it was very real, and the numbers do not lie. On the flip side, though, I also received flowers, not from him. I received flowers that were dropped off. I received gifts that were dropped off. I received texts, calls, countless cards, clients that were checking in, and all that to say that the world is a better place with you in it, and people know when you are gone. And don't ever let someone trick you into thinking that you can skip through the realities of this world and be better for it, because that is the devil talking. And to everyone who was there with me throughout this experience, I know I disassociated. I know that sometimes I still do, because I'm different. And I know that, and I recognize that, and I own that. And some ways it's good, and in some ways it's bad. And I am just different. But what is not different is the love that we have shared in friendships and in bonds I can't even begin to fully express my gratitude for. And for others, I will say that you may not think that you have it. You may think that you have to earn it or explain your way to it, but I promise you that somewhere, in some way, in this world, there are people who love and support you without judgment or without fail, without question. And I felt the depths of that and the truth of that throughout this experience, for sure. And so that is the silver lining of this. And so, in this series, we take you through kind of chronologically my experience, and we have detailed that out as much as possible. But to break it down and wrap things up in a nice, neat bow as much as possible, I just want to hit on a few final impacts that this has all had and what that can look like also for other people. The impacts of narcissistic abuse, intimate partner violence, coercive control. Again, I'm not diagnosing anyone. This is solely based on my experience, but these effects are also true for other forms of abusive and toxic relationships. And as a whole, too, why I'm so passionate about talking about this is because these have deep, multifaceted effects that go beyond the individual, extending to and affecting family systems, society at large, obviously, but work and children. And I mean, you begin to name it, it hits everywhere. I can't even think of somewhere that the impacts of these relationships doesn't begin to infiltrate after some period of time. And so that's why I'm so passionate about raising awareness for it and talking about it. The need for comprehensive intervention and prevention and support services is essential in talking about these things. And so that is what I want to address and break it down and make it as tangible as possible, because I can share my story and be a voice for that, but I also just believe in trying to make it as real, raw, tangible for you guys as possible, and give you examples too. Not that I haven't already done that, but break it down just a tiny bit more. So we're going to do a few categories: physical, mental, relational, and community. So they will be kind of quick, but I want to kind of go through those. There's obviously more. These are just the ones that I kind of hit on and thought of immediately. So with physical impact, there's one main thing I want to talk about here. But before that, I will say, and I have said before, that chronic illness did prime me for this differently. And I've heard from a lot of you in the DMs and stuff that you agree with that or have been through something similar. I know that my audience prior to this was a lot of women with chronic illnesses, because that is who I coached prior. So there's an interesting crossover there. But I feel like this primed me in the sense that my nervous system is always something that I'm trying to manage. And so if I get triggered, if I get stressed out more or something like that, the roller coaster for me is far different than the roller coaster for the average person going through these relationships and feeling these triggers. And so my biggest issue is always kind of staying at that baseline and trying to navigate pain and sleep and things like that, which are exacerbated under a flare, which is having, extreme stress, such as betrayal, trauma, things like that. And so this all just was kind of the perfect storm for me physically that really shot my pain up in a lot of ways. And so that is just kind of a side note. I think that we can all kind of look at the physical impact of this. There's many ways to look at it and take it, but your body is going to take an extreme hit in many ways, depending on the spectrum of physical abuse that does happen, but also just in being in that constant state of fight or flight. If you are coming into it with pre-existing health conditions, I think that does prime you to go through it differently. I did come to be diagnosed with complex PTSD months and months after being home, well into 2024. And this is what I wanted to talk about. This is what I'm including in the physical side for a few reasons. So Psychology Today explains or defines complex PTSD as a psychological condition that results from prolonged or repeated trauma, traditionally experienced over a long period of time. Unlike PTSD, which can develop after a single traumatic event, PTSD is more common among people who have endured ongoing trauma, such as emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, neglect, domestic violence, or captivity. Many symptoms look the same in PTSD as in PTSD. Both have symptoms of re-experiencing, avoidance, and hyperarousal, among other similarities. But to meet criteria for PTSD, one must have symptoms of PTSD plus 3 additional clusters of symptoms, namely emotional dysregulation, negative self-cognitions, and interpersonal hardship. So it is said that it would be like going through a car accident a couple times a week for years, never knowing when it will happen again or if it will ever stop. The brain never gains the understanding that the event or threat has ended. Thus, our reactions to current events that have nothing to do with our history can often give us the same reaction as if we are back in that state. So welcome to my world. As I'm sure many of you in similar situations have experienced. Why I'm putting it in here is because it's a brain injury. And this comes from Every Memory Deserves Respect, the book. We do know that PTSD is a brain injury. Same with PTSD. Victims who suffer from PTSD experience extreme flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety. So why it's in this category is that it's a brain injury. And I know that you can look at that a few different ways, but for me, it had this extreme cascade of effects. So being hypervigilant 24/7, not allowing my body to rest. I was already in the fight or flight. But living in that hyper arousal keeps my pain pumping. It keeps you just living a different life. Your mind is somewhere different than everyday life, I feel like, and you get worn out. Also, your brain should not be having to, think about these scenarios or look around at the world in this way all the time. And so it wears you out, and you're living in this weird state of being hyper vigilant, but also just being so physically worn out and coming out of trauma. And it's this weird dichotomy that you kind of face. And the physical side too of coming out of these relationships and trauma is that you're also so tired and you just want to sleep 24/7, and you're not having to be on 24/7 because you're not around your abuser, and you're having that come down effect, which is a gift. But also it's so weird because you just feel like you could hibernate, and you're not having to, be on guard or look at your phone or be on 24/7 or whatever. But you're still feeling the need to be protective, and it's this weird suspended kind of state that you're in. And it, when heaven meets hell, it has many different definitions and many different ways in which you can look at it. And so this is the physical side of it. Is it takes many shapes and forms for people. This is how it looked for me, and my philosophy as it has been. And again, this is not medical advice. This is not mental health advice. This is not anything. This is my experience, is to go right through it and give yourself exactly what you need, and to feel exactly what you're feeling, and to not numb it down or dole it out. And one of the best things I can say is giving yourself the ability to talk about it, giving yourself the grace and time to not push as hard, which is way easier said than done, and I recognize that. But if you can big picture look at what you've just come out of, I think that you can find a bit of empathy for yourself and how you're feeling, and understanding for yourself and how you're feeling as well on days when you want to push or feel like you should be different or doing something different, that you're exactly where you need to be. And you rest when you need to rest, as hard as you need to rest, and know that your body's fighting hard for you, and give your body that grace as well to do what it needs to do for you. On the proactive kind of side of things too, once I went through a very, very long period of time of just resting, just healing, just getting my pain under control, just sleeping, just getting my feet under me. But then I did do a few things to make myself feel more educated, and to make myself feel like a bit more of a threat, and empower myself so I didn't feel as helpless. Not that I've never really felt helpless. I've always felt very strong, but I think that you need to take your power back in any way possible, and reassure and remember who you are. Reassure yourself and remember who you are. And so I started doing I did some jujitsu privates. That was recommended by everyone. Everyone, if you want to be safe or anything, do jujitsu. And that was recommended by everyone. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do jujitsu. Can't even say it. But I cannot tell you how many times that came up in conversations. And to go into classes and actually doing that was very overwhelming to me, especially coming out of trauma and everything. And this is a whole other episode to talk about. But I had some resources and some amazing people who were in that world and willing to just kind of sit with me one-on-one. And so I did some of those things and learned some basics and started kind of gaining strength and skills and understanding of what that looks like. And so that is something I did. I any kind of self-awareness, self-protection, self-education. I eat that stuff up. I love that stuff. I think the more you can feel just empowered and strong in your own body and environment is a win for anyone. And I also went to the War Party Wellness Weekend, which we heard from Jeremiah in the last episode. I encourage you guys to follow them and check them out more. They are doing amazing things. You don't have to be someone in the Native community. You don't have to be someone who's gone through any of these things. If you just want to hang out with amazing, supportive people and learn more skills surrounding any of the themes of events that they're putting on, go. I encourage you. I hope to be at as many as possible. But it really did help to kind of get me back on my feet and remind me who I am. And I met amazing, amazing people at that one, and I'm just very grateful for that experience. And you can catch more of his interview. I'll be sharing more of his interview as well here soon, so stay tuned for that. But things like that, I just was very aware in what I was doing and started putting myself out there in certain situations that were, felt safe, but felt like they would push me a little bit, get me out of my comfort zone, and help me physically feel like I could take on anything. And I can, and you can too. So that is the physical side of things. It's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing thing. It's not ever, I don't want to say, oh, it's great and it's fine. It's not. Things are an everyday battle to work on how I'm feeling and manage my health, my sleep, everything. But it gets better, and you just have to have patience and grace for yourself. The mental impact of all of this is... where to begin with this? That not only is your body working extremely hard, but so is your mind. And obviously your mind is part of your body with the complex PTSD, or even PTSD. It's a brain injury. Your mind is hurting. But there's a lot going on with all this. And I think that the biggest thing is that when you face a trauma like this, or especially a betrayal trauma, anything, it forces you into low self-esteem and self-worth issues. And for me, it felt like, oh, I'm back with my parents. I cannot be alone. I cannot be with myself. I don't trust myself. I had this life and it's gone. And it was so much to swallow at once. And it's a lot. And I know that I'm not alone in that. And I know that other people feel that. But I do just want to call that out, that you suddenly feel like you don't have a place in this world or a thing to offer or anything. But I will say that if anything, I think it makes you far more valuable and worthwhile, because you've been through things and you will come out the other side, and you can help others and guide others through that in ways that some people cannot. Or, you can be a light for people in their darkest times. And so there is a silver lining to it, but it doesn't mean that it feels any better when you're going through it at the very start. And the mental impact was extreme, and it takes a long time to come out of. And that also comes with depression and anxiety. And these are extremely common. I will talk about these more. I have talked about these more on my social media. And especially in past episodes, but it is a numbing and a burning at the same time. And it's where you learn the dichotomy once again of pain, and right and wrong, and you know yourself, but everything goes out the window when you start to feel these things and when your brain is not connecting with your body. And again, I just want to call out these things that there's nothing wrong with you. It is an injury. It is a trauma. It does not mean that you cannot be helped or that there is not a solution or good to come. I also recognize that it sucks, and we can say that it sucks. And I think that sometimes it's, there's positivity, and I get that, but also I want to see you in the suck and see that and say that, and also tell you that it will get better. But there's no timeline on it. And I think that we also are a timeline society and tell us the time or tell us the steps. And there's not always clear steps with this. And that's the hard part. But you need to just write it out and write it through, but also reach out and get resources, because that's going to make the biggest difference for you. And people need to know, and people need to be aware, because it's not something that you go through alone. So the mental side of things, the self-esteem, self-worth issues, depression, anxiety, also grief. I came to know grief extremely, extremely well. Did not plan on it, did not plan on becoming besties with grief, but she wrapped her arms around me and did not let go for a very, very long time. And grief is something that I don't think we talk about. I never really heard people talk about either. And I think that that's why when I was going through it, I was like, what? It feels so wrong and so weird. And I think in these cases too, you're mourning a living person, and you're mourning your future plans and yourself in a lot of ways. And it feels really odd because you feel like you should not be. And, you're told, you should be moving on and all of this stuff. But sometimes you cannot control these things. I think the resounding message with the whole mental side of things is you can't control any of it. And we want to control everything, but you can't. And you have to write it out, but a lot of times it just sweeps you out to sea, and you have to be okay with that. And you have to know that it's okay to be lost at sea sometimes, and you're going to come back. And the drowning in grief does not mean that you're drowning in life. And I think a lot of times we equate the two, but it's very different. And with me, there are two things that helped me a lot with my grief that I do want to share. One thing is calling it out and actually laying it to rest in a sense. And so I didn't plan on this at all, but we had I was in Arizona having some different treatments done. I had some ketamine. We were doing a few different things, but we also, which I will share about, ended up at a place, and it was kind of like a little temple thing of rocks, and you could put anything there, you could whatever. And some people put things that they had found, like a flower or a leaf or a stick or a penny or another rock or whatever. And it had kind of been built up over the years, and it was so unique to you if it was a prayer or if it was, an offering or whatever it was. And for some reason, I was having a really hard time with the things that we had talked about in our relationship that were not going to happen. In particular, our future, but also kids and stuff like that, and kids' names and all of that. And I needed to get it out of me. And again, it feels like a death. You've planned these things, but then they're not going to happen. And I remember I would walk this time and time again. This path. I would walk this path, walk this path, walk this path. And then I went up and I had my little rock and I put it up there and I sat there, and I remember putting it there, and to me it was an offering of laying to rest I said to myself the kids' names that we had, and I put them there, and to me it was like a laying to rest of them in that. And I know it sounds so dramatic. I can hear it and I know it, but for me, and if you've been a friend of grief, you know that it's not rational. It doesn't make sense. I had to lay them to rest my own way, on my own time, in some place safe. And that was my process. That's what I had to do. And so that's what I would offer up to people too, if you're struggling in any way. And that can look like anything, but for me it was like, oh, this is something that I obviously did not take lightly. It was discarded in 1 second, but I don't take it lightly. And so I needed to honor it in a certain way. And you need to honor anything in your relationship in a certain way too, and whatever that looks like for you. But I couldn't carry it, and it was something I kept getting hung up on too. And I've never told anyone this. I never talked about it or anything, but I had to, for all intents and purposes, lay them to rest there and leave them there and move on. And I feel a lot better. I feel a lot lighter. And you can do that with anything. You can do that with whatever, but you have to do that with grief. You have to work with it and move on in any certain way that you need to. The second thing is that a therapist recommended to me utilizing a grief box. And I was like, I don't know what it is, and I just don't wanna. And it was described to me as taking everything that you have in relation to this experience and relationship, putting it in a box, putting it away, setting a timer, same time every day, pulling it out, setting a timer again for 5-10 minutes, whatever you want. It doesn't even have to be that. You don't even have to follow the timer, but sitting with it and then putting it away. Same time next day, come back, sit with it, whatever. And I said, well, how long do you do that? I said, that sounds extremely painful. How long do you do that? And she said, until you don't feel it anymore. So I don't know if I can do that. And this came up because I said I keep ruminating. And I had, at this point in time, this was very early on, I said I have a box of some things and I feel like I can't get rid of it. I don't know what to do, but I don't want it. Obviously it doesn't feel good. I don't know what to do with this. And she said, and I would ruminate, obviously 24/7. As I've said a lot before, the rumination was a big, big problem for me. And she said, you set an alarm. You know what time each day you're going to deal with this. You treat it like a meeting. You're going to do it at 2:00 every single day or whatever time you choose. That way you know you're not going to miss it. You're not going to have your time with it, but it doesn't take over your whole day. And I remember the first few times I opened the box, I would just sit there and sob. And I maybe could get through a few things in the box, and then I would close it. And it just would feel like your heart was being ripped out of you. And I remember probably a week in, I realized I didn't cry. I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me that I'm not crying? And then I remember one day I missed it. Like I didn't do it. And I didn't think about it. And it just happened again and again and again. And slowly you don't care. And it was a great process for me. And I would encourage you to think of something similar if you're struggling. This could be anything. This doesn't have to be someone you've been in a relationship with. This could be your dog, or I don't know, anything. If you've lost anyone or anything that is very hard to get over, I think that a lot of times we live in this world where it's like, oh, move on. And grief doesn't work that way. Nothing like this works that way. Nothing works on these timelines. You need to give it time and space, but you also need to give it attention. You can't just not address it. And I think that that's the key thing, is that we think, oh, I'm going to give it time and space, but you do need to address it also, and you need to look at it head on. And so doing it in this way was extremely, extremely helpful. And it's not to say that, you just don't feel anything, but soon you lose being so activated by it. And that was the greatest gift for me, is that I just didn't feel the need to get upset. I didn't feel anything when I looked at it. I felt it was stuff, and it's sad what happened, but I can move on and move forward with it, and I don't need it. And that was the greatest gift of all with that, is feeling like the grief had loosened her grip on me a little bit. So I would encourage anyone to consider that. So that is a little tidbit. I know I covered a lot on there on the mental side, relational side. I didn't trust myself to allow this to happen. Like, who was I that this happened? And I allowed myself to let this happen. I know I shared that Jordan B. Peterson quote in episodes prior, that, I need to completely retool my perceptions of everything. And I don't mean that lightly, but everything, that I allowed this to happen, and that I would believe in people like this. And that was really where I was at with this. And my life in coming back from this has felt like that Office scene where they all are pointing air guns at each other. There's the three of them, and they're all pointing air guns at each other, and you don't know who to trust, and who's going to make the next move, whatever. And that was my life for many, many months. And it is not a way to live. Going through life, not trusting anyone, not trusting yourself, is no way to live. And I just remember that I would always think of that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm living that scene. And, I know who I've met prior to this. I know people who have been in my life for a long time and can trust them and do, but this really inflicted a great sense of loneliness and isolation. And, we see in these relationships that abusers oftentimes isolate their victims from friends and family, leading to loneliness. But there's also the side after the relationships where this happens too. And it's a secondhand kind of effect of these relationships where this sets in, and we do isolate and become lonely by proxy of these relationships because of the lack of trust. Big one for me too is the guilt. And I don't even feel like it's shame as much. I think it's just the blame. I feel extremely guilty, and I blame myself for all of it. And I will be very open about that. I know that he's evil, horrible person, but I know that victims, and myself included, can blame themselves for the abuse and struggle with guilt and shame. I don't blame myself for the abuse. I know that that's on him and will always be on him. My guilt lies in who am I, once again, to have put my faith and trust in a person like this. And I feel that I will probably never recover from the fact that I put my family and friends through something like this, and that's something that I will never forgive myself for. The amount of time and grief and anger and sadness that this has put my loved ones through, and that happened because of my actions of getting into this relationship, and I wrestle with that all the time, and I feel extremely, extremely guilty for that, even though I went into it open-hearted and with love. I feel so bad, and the riptide, that came from this is crazy to look at and to think about, and sucked a lot of people out with it. And I am so sad for that. I'm so sorry for that. And that's something that's on me and something that I have to wrestle with and live with. And I wasn't able to be present for a lot of things. Even if I was physically here, I wasn't mentally here. We had, we had a few funerals in the family. We had loss of family members. I wasn't even with it for those events. I feel like the grief of those and the shock of losing those family members has hit me much later, but I wasn't as supportive as I should have been and could have been. I feel like this hardened me significantly. I've just been less available. And it is just something that I carry the guilt for. And I know it hasn't necessarily impacted my relationships in that they've changed a lot. I know that these people are still there for me. I know that my family is still there for me. My friends are still there for me, but I feel it. And I feel like I can never fully come back from that or repay you all for that. And this is where Dr. Ramani says that this is a public health issue of our time, because not only does it impact the individual, so not only does this relationship impact me physically and mentally, but our relationships take a huge toll, and the trickle down is astronomical. And this is where we see the impact on society and everyone else. And it's not just a me problem, or it wasn't just a me problem, it became an everyone problem. And so that is really the widespread issue of these relationships. And so the one saving grace, the one thing that I can say as we kind of go into the community aspect of this, is that what made a big difference for me is community, and people who didn't push me to show up, who just were there, who encourage you and allow you to say I'm not okay and let it hang, and people who ask you for answers I know are not your people. So my hope is that this show fosters a sense of safety and community, and also awareness on how to best show up for survivors, kind of what runs through the minds of survivors, what survivors are going through, and how you can best support them and how to show up for them during and after these relationships, and hopefully also on the prevention side as well. And just to foster, like I said, a safe sense of community here. To victims or survivors, you are safe here. You are welcome here. You do not have to live out the rest of your life in silence. My goal here is to really break these cycles. And I know that we do not do this with a single voice or a single post, but it is a collective and it is a community. It is raising awareness and it is taking action. It is showing up for each other. It is being vulnerable and authentic. And that is what this is. And I hope that you guys have been able to have a front row seat to it and be inspired by what it can look like, and maybe take bits and pieces of how you can implement that in your own life every day as well. When Heaven May Tell is scrappy and it's messy, but the Lord always wins. I do know that, and love will bring you home, even when it's the one thing that feels like it will break you down. That is probably the greatest lesson I have learned throughout all of this, is that the one thing that I feel like broke me is the one thing that I feel like has saved me and built me back up as well. And so that's something that I want to return to everyone. And I think that it's a charge to everyone, is to be a human and help a human, love a human, even if you do not know them very well or think that you can love them in the capacity that they need to be loved in or whatever. It's just an invitation to try. So I want to go ahead and close and provide a bit of a survivor statement. This is something that was not afforded to me in my experience and countless other women whose stories go untold or unreported. Today and every day, we speak for them. While this podcast has been a platform for me to share in detail what my experience has looked like and the impact it has had on me, I want to give space and share the words of other survivors willing to share bits and pieces of their experience with narcissistic abuse, coercive control, and intimate partner violence. Whether 90 seconds, 9 days, 9 months, 9 years, or more, trauma always leaves an imprint on the body, and no story or experience is invalid. The relationships we experience come in all different shapes and sizes, running the spectrum of abuse and toxicity, and yet one thing remains: we survive. Please note that these are hard to hear, and they do depict abuse and violence, so please do take care while listening to the next few little excerpts. Survivor number 1. For one, I kind of wish more people even knew about the experience in general. A lot of people didn't know I was in an emotionally abusive relationship with trauma. I honestly didn't even know myself until I got out of it. I guess I also want people to realize how much it can impact a person and for how long. I haven't spoken to my ex in 7 years, but I still deal with the effects every single day, and it still impacts my life much more than I wish it did. Even with the years of therapy and engaged to a now wonderful partner. I never got the chance to get closure I desperately wanted, even at the end, and I never healed all the way. I never stopped thinking about them and it, and I'm just trudging through it. But a lot of the time, I feel like I'm alone and no one knows it, or it's not top of mind. Survivor number 2. I don't feel like my situation will have a happy or successful ending. I feel like my wings in this situation have been clipped down so far. I've learned how to cope, how to deal with his outbursts delicately, or back off and not rock the boat. I do still voice my concerns, but I read for when it is safe to do so. And at some point, I gave up caring about my own life. I don't feel strong or healthy enough to make my own decisions or make it on my own, and I don't feel like my support system or access to resources is strong enough to help me. I feel like I'm dying inside most days and no longer truly scared of him anymore because I no longer fear anything. Just numb, apathetic, watching the hours, days, weeks, months, and so forth tick by. Survivor number 3. I have so much to say, but no idea how to put it into words. I want to know where the fun, selfless, compassionate person was that I first met and how he could be the polar opposite not even a year into it. I want to know why even when he was caught red-handed cheating, why he could never admit it. I want to know why he fought so hard to stay with me when he wasn't even happy to be with me. Why he could be so angry and abusive towards me and put on a completely different act around others. My hope for him is that he has improved, even if just a fraction, towards his new wife. I hope that since he has a daughter of his own now, that he is treating her with respect and teaching her the kind of man that she should look for. Survivor number 4. He beat me, bruised me so severely I had to wear a long sleeve for 2 weeks. He choked me multiple times, once so badly that I couldn't breathe and would have gone to the hospital, but he wouldn't call an ambulance and wouldn't let me do it. He pinned me down on the bed and screamed at me many times. He belittled me in front of my friends and family. He made me sign a relationship contract and broke every tenet. He accused me of cheating over and over and viciously criticizes me. How I smell, how I drove, how I golfed, how I played pool, how I thought I didn't make enough money. He choked me, he slammed my head against the wall, and bit me. He actually bit me. All the while going back and forth, apologizing, saying how much he loved me, how we could work it out, how we were worth it, and saying how I was lying about the pain or remembering the incident incorrectly. He said I was mean to him, and that's why he did all of it. But I knew the only solution was to make him decide to leave, and luckily he did. And I survived. To those who shared, thank you. To those still willing and able, you will always have a place to share with me. And to abusers, I say this. Karma is coming for you and she will eat you whole. I don't know when it will be or what it will look like, but I rest assured every single night that the rotten fruit that you are will fall on its own. You may think that you can bend the fabric of reality and utilize people for your personal gain, whittling them down and shaping them to the realities of your desires, but that simply isn't the case. Somewhere, sometime, something will happen, and it may not be connected to what you did, but I guarantee you that it's karma, and God's going to cut you down. This I know to be true. The only way to get back at the devil is to do as much good as you can possibly do each day. The worse you're hurting, the more good you should do for people, because we overcome evil with good. If evil has been done to you, you will never get over it by returning what you got. My hope is that you all take this personally. These are our neighbors, our coworkers, our sisters, our daughters, our aunts, our mothers, our friends. These are real lives we are talking about, and they are impacted each and every single day. And although this is a woman-focused show, this also does happen to men as well. And my personal question to you all is, why don't we talk about these things? What can you do in your everyday life to make a change? Is there someone that you can check in on, or a way to show up with less judgment and more understanding, creating a safer space for all survivors? May we know better, may we all do better, and may we all love better. Thank you for tuning in to When Heaven Meets Hell, produced by me, Allyn and Morangan, and co-produced, edited, and scored by Brad Parsons at Train Sound Studio. Although less than 1% of podcasts address domestic violence and survivor advocacy, When Heaven Meets Hell strives to change that narrative by raising awareness and promoting vulnerable conversations. You can support our mission by making sure you subscribe on your preferred platform, leaving a review, and sharing the show with others. We are so deeply grateful, and we'll see you next time on When Heaven Meets Hell.